Welcome to the Iratus Complication, a Stargate Atlantis rewatch podcast. You are joined by myself, Michael, and my co-host, Grant.
That's me.
Today, on episode 2, we're going to be talking about Stargate Season 1, episodes 3, 4, and 5. Rather than what we did with the first episode, where we had some commentary alongside the episode, what we did this time is instead we watched all the episodes, and now we're going to talk about the content of the episode, things that we found interesting. We're going to try and keep it at least roughly in chronological order. But yeah, it's going to be more of a post-mortem from now on. There were a lot of things in Rising that would have essentially made us stop, hold on, we've got to talk about this thing, and then we've got to talk about the next thing.
Yeah,
so
it's very exposition.
It's better that was done as a commentary.
Yes, that's our story.
Yeah, we're sticking to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, should be a shorter episode than the previous one, and hopefully can focus more on talking about the series.
Yes.
So I guess we should start out with episode 3, Hide and Seek.
I have a list here of things that were set up that I tried to jot down.
I do as well.
Oh, good.
I think the first thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is the introduction of the retrovirus that gives people the ATA gene.
Oh shit! Yeah, that's pretty important, isn't it? I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, because it goes from, oh, Shepard can use it to potentially anybody can. And, that's an important switch, because before that, it was like, oh, well, okay, Shepard can use it and Beckett can use it and there are a handful of other people, but now it really broadens it going forward. And it's not successful on everybody going forward, but enough key characters, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the first big story development.
Yeah, I didn't even jot that down, but obviously that's super important. Just from a logistical standpoint, they need to make sure that as we will talk about soon enough, a little later, sometimes you need to have the freedom to write a situation where if one of the people with the gene is in peril, there needs to be someone else who can operate ancient things. You can't have 3 people in the whole base that can do it. But they needed to give themselves an out for, Intrigue later, okay, well, it doesn't work for everybody, so it's still not everybody.
Yeah, it's not a perfect solution, so they can still have that dramatic tension. I mean, it was mentioned in Rising a couple of times. For example, when Shepard went off to rescue Sumner, right? Ford is like, "Hey, you're the only one who can fly us out of here," right?
Yeah. And he's like, "I'll be back anyway. I'm gonna go." I had the water purification.
Oh yeah. Small detail, yeah.
Small detail, but something that someone at some point would have been like, "Now wait a minute. Sure they have food, but how are they getting water?" And so they were like, "Here, the ancients have, obviously, as a very advanced race, they can desalinate the water of the ocean."
Yeah, and that's something I think that Stargate does very well is they give you they kind of sandwich impossible stuff next to explanations. So what they'll do is they'll explain, oh, this thing works and, does this and yada, yada, yada. And there's still some hand waving. But they'll be explain one thing that is somewhat plausible. Obviously, the ancients would need fresh water. So having a desalinator makes sense, right?
Right.
And then they'll just go off the deep end with some random thing and then not explain it, but your brain's like, oh, well, they explained that previous thing, so I'm sure there's an explanation out there.
Yeah, they just incept the idea that there is an explanation because they give you so many other ones that you're just more willing. They build trust, you're saying, with the audience. I'm sure there's something.
Yeah, they hand wave a lot of stuff, but they still give explanations for why stuff works and how stuff is proceeding, right?
Yeah.
I think another thing that's introduced around the same time is the what we will see pay out at the end of these 3 episodes that we're talking about in this episode, which is suspicions being put on the Athosians as being Wraith collaborators.
Yeah, it's there from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean it is there. It's a valid suspicion, right? Because they keep running into the Wraith and they're like, well, maybe it was one of them. We don't know, right? But that's kind of, pinged again, right? To kind of keep it in the back of your head that, can we trust the Athosians? Can we not trust the Athosians? It adds a little bit of tension that's not paid off in this episode. It's not paid off in the next episode. You have to wait until episode 5, Suspicion, to get that payoff. it builds a baseline paranoia of the expedition that I think is valid, right? Especially for it being despite being run by a civilian, a mostly military operation.
Yeah.
Right? It makes it realistic in that sense.
And speaking of which, we really got some good Weir characterization in these episodes.
Yeah.
And I really like, Tori Higginson. She does this, she's constantly towing the line between being gentle and being firm.
Yeah, she's very assertive when she needs to be.
Yes, but she has like little playful moments. She cocks an eyebrow, she smirks. But I don't know. I find it all very appealing.
And we definitely see that switch in the next in episode 4, which is 38 minutes, and we'll get to that in a second when she's talking to Kavanaugh. But to focus back into episode 3, just to give everybody just a quick rundown. Right, essentially what happens is Jinto, one of the Athosian kids, is what we would consider a version of hide and seek with one of his friends in the middle of the night, and accidentally
they chase each other, and one pretends to be a wraith.
Yeah, and accidentally unleashes the shadow monster from Lost.
God damn you!
I mean, let's be honest. There's okay, it's a shadow. It goes around harming people. You might as well just call it the shadow monster from Lost. I know they're not mechanically the same. Yada yada.
Yeah, but they call that the smoke monster, though.
Yeah, I know, but still, it's the same effect.
It's more like the Vashnarada from Doctor Who.
Okay. I don't watch Doctor Who, so unfortunately, I'm not going to get that reference. But yeah, so Jinto accidentally releases this electrical smoke monster. Who starts trying to eat power, right? That's the A plot, is how do we get rid of this monster. Part of that A plot is finding Jinto, because they don't know it's a monster. They think it might be ghosts, which...
Yeah, they're not sure.
I mean, let's be honest, in the scope of things in Stargate, having a ghost is not exactly not plausible, right?
Yeah, and they even say that in the show. It's like McKay's... Weir says, "Who would have thought you believed in ghosts?" to McKay. McKay says, "Well, yes, I didn't, but then I learned about these things called wraiths who suck the life out of you with their hands. What the hell is that?"
Yeah, but here's the thing. McKay knows about the Goa'uld. He knows about Ascended Ancients. Ascended Ancients are essentially just ghosts with superpowers. They are literally gods. And that's another thing that comes up in hide and seek that I kind of wanted to talk with you about, because you've watched a lot of SG1 as well, is, as we know from the later seasons with the Ori, that's how the Ori get power, is being worshipped, right? So ascended beings gain some power by being worshipped, which is interesting because in the Milky Way, obviously the ancients aren't worshipped, right? Or at least not openly worshipped as much as in Pegasus. Almost every culture worships the ancients. So it's obviously they would, just by being pure energy, they would obviously have some power no matter what. But it's interesting that, they've got this non-intervention thing, but they're still being worshipped. Like the Ori, the only difference semantically between the Ori and the ancients is that the Ori actively grant favors to the people who worship them, right?
Yeah, and they're overall rather more malicious about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're at that time roughly. I don't know if we're exactly at those seasons, but we're at that time roughly where we're getting introduced to the Ori in SG1. If we want to hop timelines, right?
Oh, really? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, it's around this time that we're getting introduced to the Ori. Now, how much of that is cross-pollination and how much of that is the fact that it also gives an excuse for why the peoples of the Pegasus galaxy are much more familiar with gate technology, much more comfortable with gate technology, right?
Yes.
I think it definitely serves that purpose more than drawing comparison to the Ori. But I just think that's an interesting thing to point out, because Halling...
Yeah, Halling does that little prayer.
Does a prayer, and then later on they're talking about a ritual, and then even further on, the funerary rites of the Athosian people is a quote-unquote ring ceremony, where there's a symbolic Stargate essentially placed around the deceased and all this other stuff. it's seasons off, but their religion is essentially worshiping the ancients, which makes sense. The ancients having all the advanced technology and everything.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Something I hadn't considered, and I forgot about that aspect of the Ori, who are terrifying, by the way.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know if this is the intent, but that does make you be like, you brought all these people here, and then you sowed the seeds so that they might worship you, ancients. Like, how pure are you?
Well, I don't think the ancients actively encourage the worship, but
no,
let's be honest,
but
they literally seeded life in the galaxy. So
yes, they did. I have some other points here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Shepard likes football.
Yeah,
I wrote down. The one thing, here's one personal item, right? Not something of his childhood or his family, but a recorded football game.
Yeah.
And this may shock both you and the audience, but I don't know what game it was or the significance of it, and I wouldn't have any frame of reference for that anyway. Not being much of a sportman. Yeah,
I don't have much of knowledge of it. I know it was a college football game, from what I can understand.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Well, he talks about the quarterback winning the Heisman, which is a college football award. Yeah. The other thing is, essentially, it's one of I don't know what the record is. I don't know how long it stood or whether it was a record at the time, but it's a guy throws a ball really far in the play. Okay, it's and
yes,
and it's kind of important because it you can talk more to this. It points out the kind of cultural cachet that we all carry around, because he's trying to explain this to Taylor.
Right? Yeah, that's right. We talked about this a little bit as it was happening. So he turns around and he says that was a Hail Mary, and that's something I have heard of, which also speaks to how ubiquitous it is as a turn of phrase, like just in the English speaking, or maybe it's only in North America. I'm not sure, but anyway. And if I were to say that was really a Hail Mary, okay, that was a desperate last-ditch effort, right? We all know that means that. But he turns and he tries to explain this to Taylor. Let's say someone from a different country, as I was just saying here, on Earth, in our reality, asked me what that meant. They were like, Hail Mary, like Mary, Hail Mary, Mother of God, like the prayer. Like, they would have heard of Christianity, they would have heard of Mary, Jesus's mom. Like, there would be some frame of reference. I could be like, oh yeah, it's a football play where it's like a desperate long pass generally. So it has come to mean just a desperate last-ditch effort, right? But he turns and he tries to do that exact thing to Taylor, who's from another galaxy, and it's just, and obviously that doesn't work. He's like, it's like a Christian. It's a prayer.
There was this woman named Mary.
yeah. Like, how much? Like, then it becomes, you have to explain the amount of things that you have to explain. Just
at that point, you basically need a Bible, right?
Yeah. And it's a really interesting way, I'm sure the writers put in there, just to like further explain. There's another part in this episode where where Shepard is trying to tell a scary story to the kids, and he's just ripping off the character of Jason, right?
Yeah.
The hockey mask, and they're like, "What's hockey?" So he's like, there's this whole, several times in this episode, they're kind of solidifying how difficult it is to interact and share your culture with someone who has zero frame of reference.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Truly zero.
Yeah, truly nothing at all. And it's interesting that they played with that.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we were talking about in the first episode, and I assume we will mention several more times as episodes go on, but it speaks to the grounded nature of Stargate compared to other sci-fi series.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'm aware of that really happens on that kind of level is the Darmok and Jalad episode of Next Generation.
Phenomenal episode, yes. Yeah.
But if it wasn't a entire language based off of analogy to stories, right, and allegory, they don't have any issue, right? It's like...
Yeah, universal translator, blah, blah, blah.
How do you translate the concept of money? Or how do you, it's like, you really can't, but it's, it's a little bit of hand waving. And that's, to an extent, this again is the explanation sandwich that Stargate does, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes, oh yeah, no, there are these cultural differences, but like we don't realize this, but in our daily lives we spout off, saying after colloquialism, right?
Yes.
It's like I I recently moved from Kentucky up to New Hampshire, and I said the phrase "I'll be there with bells on," and had somebody look at me like I had 6 heads.
I've never even heard that turn of phrase.
Yeah, so it's I don't know the origin, but it's it's one of those things I've heard pretty much all my life, and it just means being there and ready and excited, essentially, right?
Right.
That's the rough translation, but it's like if you've never heard that phrase, "I'll be there with bells on," what the hell does that mean, right?
Yeah, that's
So and stuff like that is going to come up in the script, but I think by again doing the explanation sandwich kind of thing, right? Where you have something unbelievable and then you explain something and then you don't explain something else, right? It allows the understanding to be, well, when the camera was off, they, talked about, oh, this is what this means kind of thing, right?
Right. Yeah. And this is, I mean, in terms of the franchise as a whole, this started with pretty much all of O'Neill's interactions with Teal'c in SG.
Oh, yeah.
And Taylor, we talked about how there are some stand-ins, but it's not for the original, for the team of SG-1 in Atlantis, but it's never direct. But Taylor is very much a Teal'c. She speaks formally, and she doesn't understand all these idiomatic expressions.
Mm-hmm. She's not her character's not as playful as Teal'c, though. And I mean that in the way that, like, Teal'c, for example...
Teal'c is used playfully.
Yeah. Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, he's very staunch, but that misunderstanding is often used. It'll happen, and then, like I talk about, the music will go do 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 do, like piccolos will happen, just to be like, wasn't that funny? But that doesn't happen with Taylor, really. Yeah.
Because Teal'c has the constant callback of undomesticated equines, right?
Undomesticated equines could not.
Wild horses, Teal'c.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And stuff like that. And I think, yeah, like you were saying, it's not a 1-to-1, but you've still got those correspondents where it's familiar characters, but not the same character. And I think that's key for especially onboarding people. Yeah. And I mean, later on, we'll get Ronan Dex, who is a more direct translation of Teal'c to the Pegasus Galaxy.
He is in his function, but not in form, and certainly not in personality.
Yeah. And I mean, by having 2 aliens on the team, it does make Atlantis much more unique. Because you've still got the scientist, you've still got the the commanding officer who cracks wise and always has a witty comeback kind of thing.
Right.
But I like that despite Atlantis starting out very much hitting the same type of beats as SG-1, it eventually develops into its own distinct like team dynamics, right?
Yeah. And I'm just realizing something interesting. They kind of lampshade the reason that Shepard is similar to O'Neill. Because Shepard wasn't attached to this at all. He was the pilot that flew O'Neill there. And O'Neill ended up liking him so much, because they're the same person, that he recommended him for the expedition.
Yeah.
So perfect. Of course he did. Yeah, it makes so much sense.
All right. So... getting back to the plot, I expect us to have many digressions, but let's get back to the plot. So, right, we've got to defeat the smoke monster. How are we going to do that? That's the question that they kind of have to answer. And of course, almost every Stargate episode has the normal 3-act structure, and multi-part episodes have a 3-act structure over 3 episodes. It's pretty straightforward, but the B plot that they've got running throughout the episode is that after McKay gets the ATA injection and gets the ability to use ancient technology, he gets a personal shield device, which he uses to defeat the smoke monster in the end. I don't feel like it's necessary for us to spoil the ending.
Well, yeah. So if you're listening to this now, presumably you have just or at least
hopefully you have watched the episode. McKay saves the day in the end.
Frankly, you're a freak, and I wish you would not listen. But please still rate us 5 stars. Yeah. But don't. I mean, watch the episodes. You weirdo. You nut. You. All right. I'm sorry. I got it.
But anyway, so right how they defeat the shadow monster is that McKay gets a beautiful character change at the end, where he goes from being cowardly throughout the entire episode to finally I hate this phrase, but manning up and using the shield device to throw an aqua generator through the Stargate, and the smoke monster chases after him.
Being heroic for a moment.
Yes.
Putting others before himself.
Well,
it was still self-preservation, I guess.
Yeah. And then he faints.
Passes out.
Passes out. Yeah, sorry.
He earned it that time.
Okay, so that's how the episode gets resolved. But I'm getting to this point because I want to talk about my favorite scene in episode 3, which is when Shepard tosses Rodney McKay off a balcony, and they are both just so giddy with each other.
Yes, it really is, because it solidifies that there is something they can relate on some level. Because McKay's the scientist, and Shepard's literally a football-loving military guy, right?
Yeah, but as we turned out, he could have been in Mensa. This will be mentioned several times.
Yes, yeah. He is intelligent, but that's still his proclivities, right? And obviously McKay is just generally abrasive. So you're like, how are they gonna get along? But they're both children at heart.
Yeah,
really. And that's how they relate to one another.
Right.
Is just by being immature, which I personally identify with greatly.
And of course, my close second to tossing McKay off a balcony is when Shepard, shortly after, explains that the first way that they tested the personal by the way, McKay survives being tossed off because of the personal shield device. Right. Again, if you're a weird person who hasn't watched the episode already,
I don't think we need to consider these.
No, but yeah, my second favorite scene, and perhaps my favorite individual line from the entire series, is when Shepard's like, "Oh yeah, we tested it. We first tested it by, I shot McKay essentially," and then Weir's like, "What?" Like a reaction shot, and then he's like, "In the leg." Like that makes it better,
Yeah, as if that would not have potentially been fatal, even if he didn't have the shield.
But yeah, it just shows that McKay and Shepard are just big kids, and it's. I think these 3 episodes, and they are at the beginning of the series, but they do a lot for character development, right? Mm-hmm. Like the McKay that starts to get developed in Atlantis shows a clear distinction between the McKay that was in SG-1, who was a sexist asshole, right?
Truly gross. Yeah.
Yeah, intelligent, but particularly really not a cool dude. You know what I'm saying? And he loses that edge, which I think he should in Atlantis, and we'll see further character growth.
But it's still there. It's not like it's not like he shows up and you're like, this can't be the same person. You're like, okay, this is the same person. Maybe a few years later, he's better, but we got a ways to go.
I mean, he spent all that time in Russia, right?
Did he?
Yeah. So at the second time he shows up, which is the last time he shows up in SG-1, before Atlantis, he gets shipped off to help the Russians with their Stargate program.
Oh, nice. Okay.
For years or something. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, we're never going to see this character again.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I have another thing that I marked here. I know we're attempting to do our plot recap, but there's
we've the plot for this episode is rather boring. So I don't think it.
When you just
there's a smoke monster, they defeat the smoke monster. Most of it is character development.
That's fair. But there's that interesting moment we marked where or suspect that there is an entity coming around. One of the Athosians, Taylor brings one of the Athosians, a woman named Marta, to Dr. Weir.
Yeah.
It is Dr. Weir, right?
Yeah, it's Dr. Weir.
Okay. And I thought so. And Marta says, I saw a shadow, and Weir's like, just looking confused, and Taylor's like, that's what we call the apparitions that the Wraith make you see. And then Weir's like, but then Taylor's like, but I have not felt their presence here, the Wraith's presence, because she can sense it, right? And Weir says they're wrong about that, and Taylor just sort of looks perturbed and doesn't answer, and so Weir's like, okay, and then goes ahead and calls to the team in the field, I guess, that are searching around. They're not in the field, but they're searching around the base. Says one of the Athosians has claimed to have seen this wraith apparition.
Mm-hmm.
And because of her choice of words there, Marta turns to Taylor and says, because she said claimed, she does not believe me. And then Weir just like looks like and then like steps away.
Yeah, because I think Weir knew that there was no getting around that.
Yeah. And so she just sort of like steps a few steps away and like turns over her left shoulder to finish broadcasting the message over the radio.
Yeah.
And so it was like sort of a moment of a little bit of awkwardness and a little bit of her just being, if you're in the middle of a call over the radio, like it makes complete sense, but it's sort of again is building up this mistrust, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also showing. So the thing is, Dr. Weir's previous occupation was a negotiator for the UN, right?
Oh, that's
and
right.
I think she's very capable of being diplomatic when she needs to be, but I think at that point she wasn't thinking on the level of diplomacy. She was just, acting in the moment.
Right.
And I think that, it acts as a moment to make Weir real to us, right? Because we would say the same thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We would say, "Oh, someone here is claiming to," that's just a normal turn of phrase for us.
Yes.
But in the formal style of speaking that is very diplomatic that Taylor and the rest of the Athosians do, right? You can see the undertones there, right? You can see how it could be taken that way. And I think that's that's partially like Dr. Weir is realizing that, solving this misunderstanding is going to take a whole bunch of time away from solving the actual problem. Right. So it's probably not worth it to do it. But it's almost like her making a mental note that, okay, I should, definitely be careful about what I say around the Athosians.
Yeah.
And to, I think more directly, obviously, as you said, it adds to that suspicion level, right? It adds the distrust between the groups.
Yeah, or at least that doesn't. I don't think Weir was at all distrusting Marta in that moment, but now Marta is like, what the fuck? She doesn't believe me in so many words.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe not distrust, maybe at the level of just not at the level of distrust at that point, but just friction, just a little cultural friction between the two groups is starting, or is manifesting at least. And then I also took down the first mention of ascension, which you talked about.
Yeah.
Happened in this episode, and the first mention of ascension in Stargate Atlantis.
Yeah, in Atlantis we get that first mention. And that comes from the fact that the reason that that Jinto accidentally released the shadow entity is Jinto ended up in an ancient lab and accidentally pressed a button. He's probably pressing a lot more buttons.
Yeah,
they don't go into that.
They suggest that part of the spooky ghost happenings were just Jinto mashing buttons on the console, making things turn on and off while trying to look for a way to call. Eventually, he figures out how to call them. So there's a reason he's pushing all these buttons, and ultimately he does figure it out.
He just happens to release a dangerous entity in the meantime.
Yeah, like you do. It happens. Stuff happens.
Yeah, the shadow is essentially a cloud of electrical energy, and so
that feeds on same.
I believe it's McKay who posits that they were studying the creature not necessarily just because, oh, hey, it's an interesting smoky lightning cloud monster, right. But as a way to potentially achieve ascension, which is, again, this is the first mention of ascension, and they do a really good job of giving a very short 5-second explainer on here's what ascension is, how it relates to the ancients, the kind of thing that, was a giant mystery with Oma Dasala and all that,
right.
for episodes and episodes back in SG1.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And this is more proof that as much as I recommend watching SG1, you don't need to watch SG1 to get Atlantis, right? To have all the information at your fingertips.
It stands on its own and you can have enough. But there are certain emotional beats when characters from SG1 show up that will be greater, but again, not necessary. And there's greater depth to knowledge that they do go over. It would be like anything else. Like you watch the Lord of the Rings movies from Peter Jackson, then you think I should read the books, or you read the books and then you think, well, I should read the Silmarillion. I want to get more info on all this world and stuff. It's not necessary, but it's additive.
Well, if you want to stay in the same medium, it's like watching The Empire Strikes Back if you haven't watched A New Hope. you can watch Empire Strikes Back and have a narratively fulfilling time and understand most of what's going on.
That's true.
Right?
That is true.
It makes
me uncomfortable, but you're correct.
Yeah. Now, you don't get the emotional impact of seeing Vader, for example, right?
Right.
You hear about this Vader guy, but you don't, he was really front and center in A New Hope, and he plays more of a background role. Don't take it as, oh, you said that Darth Vader is not in Empire Strikes Back and he's in that movie for X number of minutes or whatever. I understand that, but he is much more front and center, the antagonist in A New Hope.
Well, yeah, he's in like the first seat, like he's there the whole time.
Yeah, he's more manipulative and kind of doing machinations in the background and then showing up, right, as kind of the big bad at the end in Empire. And I think that's the same way that SG-1 and Atlantis function, right? You get a better sense of the universe, you better sense of the villains, better sense of kind of the stuff that happens if you watch both. But you can technically watch them independently. So, I think we've covered all of my points.
I think that's
do you have anything further for episode 3?
No, that is all I had.
All right. Season 1, episode 4, 38 minutes. This is an interesting episode. Again, not because... Okay, on the rewatch, it is not as interesting if you're rewatching this for the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th time.
It's 7th for you, is it not?
It's some ridiculous number. As many times as I've watched the series all the way through, I watched the first season a lot more because there's so much information density in the first season.
As it should be the case, but yeah. I when we going through, there are some episodes that like opening shot, I'm like, yes, I remember this one. And then there are some, this is how it's been rewatching Stargate SG-1 for the 3rd time in my life, and this as well, also for the 3rd time. This is one of those episodes where, like, the moment it opened, I was like, yes. Now, interestingly, there's an A plot and a B plot, and I did not know that they were both in the same episode. So, which tells me they're both compelling enough on their own that I remembered them as, like, main stories, So it was kind of like, god damn that they were together in the same episode. So I think the tension is very good in this episode, but it is entirely built on that tension and that suspense, and suspense is one of the things in things that hold up for rewatch are compelling performances. If it's particularly lore dense and you want to like absorb all of that information again, things like that. Pure suspense, not so much. So I can understand why on a 7th rewatch it might not be as compelling. But I've got to say that on my 3rd, and my 3rd for my entire lifetime, not having seen it, I saw it for the 2nd time like 5 years ago. But watching it here, and I really, really enjoy all of I just love that they're messing with the functionality of the gate. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that we had 6 seasons of SG-1 under our belt, I believe, by this point, and the movie, and we'd never considered, what if this happens in the gate?
Yeah, and I think really this episode functions, and even the title of this episode functions as your primer on wormhole physics in the Stargate universe. Right?
Yes, or in Atlantis, yeah.
Well, not even just in Atlantis, just in general. Because all of the information about the gate, minus the fact that it takes things in whole bits, right? It doesn't do part things.
Yeah.
And even that kind of, I guess you could argue, because, like, for example, Teal'c gets stored in a buffer at one point.
Yes.
And actually, that's a Rodney McKay episode of SG-1.
Oh, shit.
Anyway, more to the point, right? This is the primer of everything that we learned piecemeal, one piece at a time, throughout the entirety of SG-1 up to this point true. About Stargates.
Yeah, it is like throughout the 1st and 2nd season, like there are different things given to you here and there, and I think all of them are in this episode. I say
yeah. So the biggest one, and that's the title, is 38 minutes, right?
Right.
They give you the time limit for a wormhole, and importantly, the line is not just A wormhole stays open for 38 minutes. It's a wormhole in non-relativistic conditions stays open for 38 minutes because that was a major plot point in SG-1.
And I just watched that episode a few weeks ago. In fact, last week, I think. And yeah, so when he said that, I was like, haha, good job covering your bases. Good job, continuity expert.
We also get the explanation of what happens when a gate shuts down and something's in the middle of it. In SG-1, that happened in the O'Neill versus Kowalski fight when Kowalski was
he was by
possessed by a Goa'uld, right?
Yeah.
It's like the second or third episode of SG-1.
I know.
Right, but it gives us that opportunity to say, oh, well, if this happens, basically half the jumper just doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah, and they were, and that's what
they spell out the discrete units rule, right? That everything has to go through before it's transmitted.
Yeah,
right?
You can't. It's not like when you're putting your hand through, your hand is showing up on the other side. It's when you step through entirely, that's when the transporting takes place. Yeah. Which is consistent with everything they've done up to this point. I mean, there's always a character that is introduced to the Stargate for the first time, and they're playing with the event horizon. And it's always that they have to step fully through for the transport to take place.
It gives you a good primer on wormhole physics and how explosions and other things can go through the wormhole as well, because they talk about, well, what if he overloads the engine pods and then the burning wreckage goes through the wormhole? Right. It also talks about how when you step through the wormhole, you are in suspended animation, essentially, right? Yeah. Your matter stream is being transmitted. So there's just a big info dump, and it's important, right? Because, I mean, I can't imagine a series named Stargate that isn't focused on wormholes, right?
Yeah.
In some capacity. Like, that's how you get places in Stargate, right?
Yes.
You've got these fancy ships, but they go through the gate.
Well, puddle jumpers.
Yeah. Well, as we discussed last episode, this series, Stargate Atlantis, is more focused on gate technology and using the gate, and the gate being more of a focus than SG-1. Well, the gate is still a focus in SG-1. Like, ships go through the gate in Atlantis. Ships don't really go. There's one ship in the entirety of SG-1 that goes through the gate.
Right.
Okay. Right. Civilizations know more about the gate. It's a much more gate-centric Stargate series.
Yeah.
I think you would agree.
Which is great. It's a great gate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, hold on. There's something that I neglected to talk about in the previous episode we just discussed in Hide and Seek, which is, again, we get that Shepard doesn't like other people naming things. Anytime anyone wants to name something, they go through the transporter, which they find on Atlantis, and McKay says, it must be a transporter. And Shepard says, well, name it later.
Yeah.
I mentioned that because it just keeps coming up.
Yeah, it's a constant theme that McKay and Ford are not allowed to name anything.
Yes.
And there are a couple things where it sticks, like the life signs detector and notably the transporters.
Right.
Right. They call them transporters. They call the life signs detector a life signs detector, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, so the running theme of nobody's allowed to name anything except for Major Shepard. So back to episode 4.
Yes.
So let's do a rundown of the basic events. And as we talked about when we were watching the episode together, it's told in a non-linear fashion, but I think the benefit comes from speaking about the narrative as it is shown to us, right? Rather than talking about it in chronological order, as it were.
Yeah, and they always they motivate all of the flashbacks, mm-hmm. because it is essentially we are getting to see visually what a character is relating to another character.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it easier to follow, considering it's all over the place. Like, if you graph this, it would be all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Because they go back, and then they go back forward, and then they go further back, and they go back forward, and
and then they go back, and then they skip part of it and go forward a little bit, but not all the way forward.
Yeah. It's all over the place, but it was, to me at least, completely followable, and
it's coherent.
Yeah, it is, and I kind of appreciate it because, you're trusting your audience whenever you do anything that's not linear.
Yeah,
and I like that it did that.
So, what happens in the episode? Well, first thing, we see a puddle jumper. It's in orbit now. If you're eagle-eyed, you will recognize it as the same planet that we saw in Rising, where the Wraith were, where the Wraith took the Athosians and Colonel Sumner and Bates and a couple other people. But it's a sci-fi planet. Unless you're paying real close attention, you're not going to... It's got rings, which make it visually distinct, but other than that, right, it could be another space gate somewhere.
When you're on the surface, there's a bit of a blue filter. Blue is pumped up a little bit. Yeah.
So anyway, we see a puddle jumper. It's damaged. It's trailing smoke in space. We're not going to talk about that.
Well, now, wait a minute. Hold on. If you are venting something that is on fire from within the pressurized cabin and it's venting out, then you could have the smoke particles still.
It looks like just normal smoke coming out. Okay.
You shut. It's not smoke. It's ancient engine ionized grunge particles.
Bullshit, right? Right? It's a contrail in a spacecraft, okay?
Yeah. You're welcome. Anyway. Ship has
obvious damage. Despite my, again, I'm not afraid of hand wavium and using stuff for media literacy.
Sure.
Smoking engine is proof that it is malfunctioning. Yeah. They approach the gate. They're going to the gate. We've seen a puddle jumper go through the gate before in Rising, and we see that its engine pods retract. Right. Well, the engine pods don't fully retract, and there's a shot that really focuses in on that and shows us that. And then it gets stuck in the gate.
Yes.
Right?
My God.
And over the course, we see Shepard, Taylor, McKay, and Ford try and essentially solve the problem of how to retract the drive pods and get the puddle jumper through the gate so that they can get to Atlantis on the other side.
Right.
That's the A plot. That's the main focus.
And initially, just as a little addition, the where the gate is sort of passing through the ship happens to be just beyond the bulkhead of the door that separates the cockpit from the sort of transport area.
So they can't get to any of the important controls, which is kind of a major plot point, right?
Yeah.
So that's the A plot. The B plot, which I would really call the A 1.5 plot, because it's really not a B plot. They're really two A plots.
True. Okay.
The second A plot is the fact that Shepard's not really helping because Shepard currently has a giant alien bug attached to his neck.
Real grody.
Yeah, it's so they're stuck. Shepard's completely useless. They're trying to figure out how to get this darn bug off of him, right? McKay is trying to fix the mechanical issue. Everybody back on Atlantis is trying to fix the mechanical issue. And I mean, okay, the series goes on. Obviously, you can't kill off the entire main SG team.
Right.
But the nonlinearity comes in when they're talking about, how did the bug attach itself to you? How do you know that it's going to kill you? Well, Wraith left me alone when it saw that it was on my neck.
Yeah,
right?
And that came pretty late in the episode where he chuckles to himself and he's just like, why are you so sure you're not going to make it? He said, because he wouldn't have left me if I were. And then it's revealed, only then is it revealed that one of those big bruiser Wraith boys came up, looked at him, tilted his head, like all humanoid monsters always do, and then just walked off. And you're like, oh shit. It's like that's a pretty clear indication. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I also, just real quick, want to appreciate that it would have been very easy for them to be like, we need one shot of the bug flying around, right? And obviously it'll have to be CG. and they didn't do it. It was practical the whole time. It's just in a web that Shepard's
Yeah.
like about to run into, and then it cuts, right, and then now it's on his neck, and it's an excellent, I think, an excellent little prop.
It's a physical prop. Of course, I was watching the commentary, and apparently they called it the blue lobster because it looked like a fucking lobster. Like,
Oh, really?
there's so many times in the commentary where the cast are talking about how like you're sitting there and you're acting either to nothing, because this was before major CG movies were a thing, right? And that was just kind of part of how actors knew how to prepare
Yeah.
for talking to nothing, right?
Yeah.
But also they were talking about how there are so many times, and particularly when doing sci-fi, where you like see props and it's a 20-foot, it's a 30-foot prop, right? It looks
Yeah.
good, but you got to be standing a little bit away from it.
Yeah.
And they're in the scene, in the thick of it, and they're like, this does not look realistic. This is absolutely ridiculous. How is this going to work out? And then it works out in the episode, right?
Okay.
And
yeah.
it's kind of a testament to how you shoot things, and that prop makers know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They know what they need a prop to do, right?
Wow,
And there are a couple things that you can see that give the prop away. Like, for example, later on, they have it kind of crawl out of the jacket after they've killed it.
Yeah, and it's just
And
like the legs sort of moving.
Well, but on the legs you can see the little hooks where they put the wires through. There are
shit.
little
Didn't notice
riveted holes there.
Yeah.
It's a 2-second cut. Okay, it's not it's
Yeah, I
not a big
missed it.
scene.
But there it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And also when he's moving his neck a little bit, and it doesn't seem quite right, where its head is supposed to be securely lodged into his carotid artery, and it doesn't quite seem like that. But you
the
know
thing
what?
is the prop does breathe.
It does.
Like all that breathing action is physical, and that's really
the
impressive.
soft part in it, and when they try to remove it with various methods, it gets real big, that underside. And also it's constantly making this noise when everything jumbles. Like when they first get stuck in the gate, or when they pour stuff on it, it makes a nice little chittering sound.
The sound effects are great.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I do think that the effect it makes is perfect. It's not overwhelming, but it's like I didn't even question it initially. I was like, yeah, that's the sound that thing makes, 100%.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the resolution of the second A plot, the bug. Now the bugs, it should be mentioned, are Iratus bugs, which we learn that. Well, later on we'll learn that there is a direct relation, but it is only speculative at this point that the Iratus bug is what the Wraith evolved from.
Or a common. They evolved from a common ancestor.
They have a
Humans
common
and monkeys,
ancestor.
essentially.
Yeah.
Or
So
primates.
it's interesting, right? They introduced this Iratus bug, this idea that the Wraith are related to it very early on, right? This is a very early plot point, and it will become a very important plot point in later seasons. And thus the name of this podcast, the Iratus Complication.
Yes.
Because I'm a giant fucking nerd.
Aren't we so fucking smart? Yeah. I can't take any credit for this. That was your name. 100%.
So let's talk about how they resolve it, right? They try pouring all sorts of stuff on it, right? There's that experimentation phase.
Shit on it, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Beckett's like, well, you might as well, because you can't cut the thing off.
You got to do salt.
They tried to shoot the thing off. It didn't work.
Yeah.
They tried to pull the thing off.
Nerve-wracking when they showed it was again in flashback, and they showed him trying to shoot the thing off his shoulder, and I'm like, good God! What you made a remark? What did you say? It's like two rednecks playing with guns in the woods.
Yeah, it's the redneck solution, right?
Yeah, just shoot it off. Yeah.
Now, in all seriousness, this does actually happen. I have witnessed this happening. Okay, so I gotta talk about bees for a second. So bees, every once in a while, domesticated bees, they will swarm, right? And that just means they leave their hive and go and look for a new hive. Well, when they swarm, they tend to find a tree usually and all congregate in the tree. So if you want to get the swarm back, right? If you don't want to lose your beehive, you have to somehow knock the queen into usually a box or some other apparatus like that.
They'll all follow.
And then you can put them back in the hive and they'll be fine, right? That's how you deal with swarms. Well, a lot of times when they go into trees high up. So unless you've got, a cherry picker or some other specialized piece of elevation equipment, they can be 30, 40 feet up and you can't reach them. If they're 5 or 6 feet up, you can just kind of shake the branch and they'll fall. Right? I've done that as well.
But you've done this personally? You work with bees?
Yeah, my mother used to keep bees. So I have been there for removing swarms. Now, there are multiple techniques for how to do this. How to get the height when you don't have access to a cherry picker is the question, right? When they're relatively low, literally you just get like a step ladder, right? You go on the step ladder, usually 2 people, so you got 2 step ladders. One person's got a box, the other person shakes the branch, right?
Sure.
Now, if they're up too high,
I'm really intrigued where this is going. Maybe I should shut up and let you finish it.
Yeah. If they're up higher, you get some sort of mechanical assistance. In our case, we had access to a front loader, a bulldozer.
Okay.
So we put the bucket up and we'd stand in the bucket. And, right. If they're even higher than that, well, what the hell are you going to do? Because they're 50 feet up, and you don't want to rent a giant piece of machinery for an hour when you got to pay the day rate, right? Yeah. Well, it turns out our initial solution was a shotgun loaded with slug.
Oh my god.
And my grandfather, who's a real good shot, trying to shoot the branch.
So you were just like, Grandpappy, I want you to blow that branch clean off. Here's a shotgun.
It was his idea. It was my grandfather's idea. Anyway, so we all thought this was a good idea because what else are we going to do, right?
Sure.
And it worked. He managed to shoot the branch off and fell down, but my mother hadn't placed the box in the right place.
Uh-oh.
So we missed the bees. Point is, my mother then went on and, this was roughly early days of the internet, so blogs rather than like YouTube or anything like that.
Right.
And, there were a whole bunch of people who were like, yeah, so, the bees were up in the tree and we couldn't figure out how to get them out. And, they were too far for a broom and we didn't have a ladder that would get up there and all this other stuff. So we tried shooting them. Apparently it's a common solution is to try shooting bees.
There's a whole community of people shooting branches off to get their bees.
So when I see, Ford shooting the Iratus bug to get it off of Shepard, I'm just like, yeah, that tracks. Right. like that happened, and I wasn't like, oh my god, that's dangerous. I'm like, well, it seemed reasonable at the time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, also, it's...
Yeah, so...
It's an alien wrapped around his neck.
It is very much, like, it's 2 rednecks in the woods being like, well, how do we get it off?
Yeah.
Well, might as well just try and shoot it. But yeah, so the solution they find... after a series of failures, including finding out that it reacts very poorly to salt water, is they do the Hollywood magic thing where they take a defib and they shock the guy, and then he dies. Right. And then the creature's like,
his heart stops. Yeah.
His heart stops, so he must be dead. Well, I'll just let go then.
Although they make him work for it, right? Taylor's grabbing the bug, trying to rip it off, and it's not coming off, even though Shepard's heart is stopped, and you're like, what the fuck? And it still won't let go, and it won't let go, and it won't let go, and then Beckett's like, wait, and then it finally relates. Like they give you a little bit of
then Ford kills the bug, and then they try and restart. Shepard's heart.
Right.
And I think the other genius thing is Shepard's heart doesn't restart.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just a.
Oh, yeah. He's good. It's not back and forth. Yeah.
And so Taylor takes him through the event horizon, right?
Yeah.
So now we've got McKay and Ford, and they're still trying to fix the engine problem, right?
Yeah.
So we've quote unquote resolved the other conflict in the thing. So now I think is a good time to talk about how they're solving the engine pods, which is what most of the episode is kind of dominated by.
Yeah.
And this introduces 2 characters that I really like in the series, one of whom I like that his character exists. I do not like the person that his character is.
How could you? Yeah.
The other, I wholeheartedly love.
Yeah.
And they're both foils for McKay. So those two characters. So obviously when Atlantis hears about this thing, they start putting engineers and scientists in a room to, figure it out. And they introduce two key scientists.
And this is the first time their names have even been mentioned either.
Yeah.
First time on screen, first time they've even been mentioned. Yeah.
You've got Doctors Kavanaugh and Zelenka. And they never meet the entire episode, which is also interesting. Right? There's never Kavanaugh talking to Zelenka. Zelenka's talking to Kavanaugh.
They acknowledge each other, or at least Kavanaugh derides Zelenka and attempting to do what he does, which ends up making McKay able to eventually save the day. For the record. Yeah.
So I think the key thing to talk about here with Kavanaugh and Zelenka, first of all, Kavanaugh is possibly one of the few, and I say this in complete confidence, one of the few Stargate characters that is not beloved by a lot of people. Like Kavanaugh is McKay, like McKay from SG-1, who's
he's
a sexist, misogynistic prick who's just a dick to everybody and thinks he's better than everybody else and thinks what he says should go, right? Kavanaugh is that McKay dialed up to 11, okay?
Yeah.
And then I think Zelenka represents where McKay could be, right? Because Zelenka's still intelligent. Zelenka even at one point essentially tells Weir to shut up. But where McKay would start snapping his fingers and telling people to shut up, Zelenka is like, if you could stop talking, please, that would be very helpful.
Right? Weir asks, is there anything I could do? And Zelenka says, stop talking. And this is what separates him. McKay would have been like, would have said it more aggressively, would have been like, stop talking, and then would have kept working. Zelenka says, stop talking, kind of realizes what he's just said, and then like turns and gives like a weak apologetic smile to Weir. That's what separates them. Zelenka still says it in the moment, and then it's like, sorry. McKay would not have apologized.
Yeah, no. And I think they both show two sides of McKay's personality and act as a good kind of show of where McKay was and where McKay is heading. Not that he's there yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think he ever really reaches the Zelenka level. But he is approaching towards Zelenka. Now, later on in later seasons, we'll see a more antagonistic rapport between Zelenka and McKay. And Kavanaugh just becomes a occasional recurring character. And we can talk about the bag of screws that is Kavanaugh.
Yeah, that guy sucks. Real quick, because we're sort of in this section.
Yeah.
Or we're talking about things that are first introduced. I took down that I really... when they were talking about throwing people, I don't know, a lot of discussion about the gate and how it works. And McKay says demolecularized, which is just such a pleasing word to me. I don't know if they made it up or not. But boy howdy, is that a fun one.
I believe it's been used in SG-1 a couple of times.
It has, okay.
By who else but Dr. Samantha Carter.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, so back to the plot. They get all these scientists in the room and they're all yelling at each other and they're yelling at Weir. And this is where we kind of see Weir start to come into her own. I think this episode really is we see Weir having to deal with the type of problems that come up in Atlantis all the time, where she's got there's even a confrontation between her and Kavanaugh where she really shows her ability to be extremely assertive when she needs to be.
And he just will not leave it the fuck alone and keep smirking, and he's so punchable in that moment. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. But she shows that she can essentially threaten with the best of them and be like, no, this is what you're doing, right? She can get people to, she understands how to get people to do the things that they need to be doing.
Yes.
And I think that's a key thing, and we see Weir's strength in this episode come out a lot more than in previous episodes.
Yeah.
Not that we've had a whole bunch of them. A whole bunch of previous episodes.
True.
We also see that later on when she's talking to Halling, right? Halling comes up and wants to do this funerary rite for the Athosians, where if you know when you're going to die, basically there's a prayer that's said, because that's very rare, because obviously their people are normally killed by the Wraith, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense, religiously why he would do that, but Weir's like, no, we're not doing that because you want me to tell those people that they're going to die.
Yeah,
and
the
I
only
won't
way to get
deliver
this
that message.
to Taylor, is for me to tell that the whole jumper, hey, you're probably going to die, and I'm not going to do that to their morale.
And that's, I think, it's interesting because the way she's talking to Halling, she's not like most of the science team who would essentially be very dismissive and be like, fuck you, I'm not doing that, and walk off kind of thing. She's, I respect your personal rights. I respect Taylor's personal rights, but I will not send that message because there is a chance that they will survive. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that shows an interesting perspective on how the Atlantis expedition differs from the people of the Pegasus galaxy. Right.
Yeah.
Humanity, Earthlings are more focused on avoiding death at all costs, as where the people of the Pegasus galaxy are very comfortable with death because it is very sudden. It comes all the time. You can't be constantly afraid of everything, right?
Yeah.
And I think these are driving home the distinctions. And it's also driving that wedge between the expedition and the Athosians, right? Which is going to get paid off in the next episode.
Yeah. There's also when they are saying, when Beckett, they eventually, to solve the Iratus bug situation, to attempt to, we talked about them pouring all the stuff on it. Because Beckett is coming over the radio to tell, over Ford's radio to tell them to try, and talking to Shepard about what's going on, right? At one point, when he first shows up, he comes over the radio. First, there's so much like little Beckett characterization in these couple of seconds. He power walks into the room and walks past the console.
Yeah.
And Grodin is like, no, over here, Beckett. And he's like, okay. And then he walks over and starts addressing them. And what he says to the man who has an alien insect embedded into his carotid arteries. Well, I'm told you have something of a Klingon. And then,
and then he catches himself.
He immediately, the sentence is out of his mouth, and immediately he closes his eyes and sighs.
That instant regret.
Yeah, regrets it so profoundly, immediately after saying it, and I identified so hard with that.
The reverse shot for that, where they go back to Shepard, and Shepard's like, very funny, Doc, is also perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
they also establish, while we're talking about these things, McKay eating all the time. Sort of introduced after he got the shield off of him in the last episode. First time he shoved something in his mouth and delivered lines through it.
Mm-hmm.
He at some point claimed he's about to go into hypoglycemic shock, and gets thrown a candy bar or a power bar or what have you by Ford. And starts eating it and talking through it again. So this is, again, McKay eating all the time.
McKay approaches Brad Pitt levels of eating on camera.
Yes.
Just constantly. And it's because McKay, let's be honest, is a hypochondriac. That is officially established, right?
Yes.
And he's got this, he's got the, I don't want to say weird because obviously people can be allergic to anything. But he doesn't have oh, I'm lactose intolerant. He doesn't have, oh, I'm allergic to nuts, right? He's allergic to citrus, right? Which is why he's constantly asking, is there lemon in this? Does this smell like,
Oh, yeah, I think in the pilot
because he's deathly
lemon
allergic to it.
Does
yeah.
it smell like lemon to you? Oh, my God.
And that's something that's established in SG-1. This is an established fact about Rodney McKay. But it's nice that it keeps coming up, because it keeps giving us a sense of his character, right?
Right.
It makes him distinct, and it's something that would actually happen, right? If you're allergic to something and you're eating, we'll see later, he's at a banquet and on an alien planet, and he will ask, is this, do you think this has lemon in it? Because he's like, I don't want to get anaphylactic shock, right?
Yeah.
But he's also just a massive hypochondriac. I don't think he's diabetic. I don't think he would go into hypoglycemic shock.
No. I don't think he is.
I think he's just being a whiny baby.
Of course.
And it's also established that he eats just way too much. He's like for example, he says the only reason he doesn't like, and actually this is in the next episode, he says, the only reason I don't like airplane food is because you can't get seconds.
Yeah, he's talking about how he doesn't mind the MREs that they've been eating.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind hospital food either. He loves to eat. He doesn't care. like you say, the only negative associated with food is that there isn't enough of it sometimes.
And
Which
I think we've all been there.
Yeah, 100%.
So, well, getting back to the plot. So the solution, right? The eventually Zelenka, cuts down the number of circuits that McKay's got to look at. It's 2 minutes to go, and McKay finds the right control path and manages to close the engine pods. Woo! Problem solved. Except the ship isn't moving anywhere because they have no forward momentum.
Yeah, normally they're reliant on the momentum. The engine's closed, but you're going through space. You're going to keep, or even if you're not, you've got forward momentum even on a planet with drag and gravity. You're going to continue through the gate and at least make it to the other side. But when you've been stuck there, your motion has been arrested.
Yeah. So, and I think that's something that, that's a little detail that a lot of series wouldn't have put in, right? It would have been, we fixed the main problem that we've been talking about. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, true.
Right.
Yeah, we would have just slid through the gate.
And also having the end of the second act failure happen right next to the end of the episode is another decision that they made, because we already had the failure with shocking Shepard, right?
Right.
That's that plot's end of the second act. Now we're dealing with an end of the second act and the third act is real short.
Yes, it is.
But what I love is upon hearing the news that they aren't moving forward, what does Ford do? He starts pushing on the forward bulkhead.
Yeah, he runs over and throws a shoulder into the front of the ship. and then
McKay just standing there going, "That's not going to do anything."
Yeah, he's McKay's like aggravatedly just explaining Newtonian physics to him, and he's just like still pushing on the wall.
Mm-hmm. And then they are saved at the last minute, literally, by Kavanaugh.
God damn it!
Who's like, if you open the rear hatch and all the air goes out, it'll push you forward enough to get through the gate.
Yeah, utilize the equal and opposite reaction of the explosive decompression. Yeah.
I mean, that's all a rocket is throwing stuff out the back really quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, then they get back to base. Shepard survives. Ford survives. Right. Everybody lives. It's a happy ending. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
And that's basically everything that I have on episode 4. Anything else you would like to add?
No, just we talked about the bit of lore that we already knew because we just see visually how it works, but that the gate can use some mechanism to sense what is a complete object that is interacting with it. Maybe it has scanners on it. I don't know, but the whole object has to be through. Yeah.
It's a hand-waved explanation, and I like I've said on multiple occasions, I'm perfectly fine with hand-waving.
Yeah, you have to, otherwise.
As long as you apply your rough ideas consistently, fine.
Yeah, your job is to make up rules and make sure that you adhere to the rules that you make up. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you want to make up a new rule that changes something, like when they decided that relativistic conditions, like being in an intense gravity field, right? Fine. Yeah. That's perfectly good. Just try to be consistent, right? I don't expect a quantum mechanical explanation for every little thing that happens in the series, right? But if you're going to make a rule, try and stick to it.
Yeah, and I think Stargate is pretty good about that, really.
Oh yeah, no, it like we've discussed, it's good at being a harder science fiction than say Star Trek or Star Wars or any of the other major sci-fi series.
For television sci-fi, it's one of the harder ones.
All right, so let's move on to the final episode for this show, this particular episode of the podcast. Yes. Now, normally we'll do 2 episodes. We're doing 3 now, so that later on, when we get some 2-parters that should be together, we can knock them out so that they're right next to each other without having a really short episode, just about one random out of the way episode.
Yeah.
All right. So, episode 5, Suspicion. This is the episode where all of the Athosian questions, are they working with the Wraith, are they not, right? Where they all come to a head and they're all resolved at the end. Yeah. I don't want to say completely resolved, but all of the animosity is gone by the end of the episode.
Well, maybe not, but the situation causing friction, there is an out.
Here's the thing. After this, in the series, there is almost zero friction between the Athosians and the expedition.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a few times when, maybe there's a little bit of friction. The Athosians still show up. They're still important, but by the end of this episode, everybody's kind of at peace with what's going on. Everybody's, comfortable with each other. Everything kind of gets explained why stuff is happening,
Sure.
So let's just start out, talking about the general plot. So the A plot for this episode, right, is that Shepard's team is going on a whole bunch of missions, and out of the last 9 missions, 5 times they've run into the Wraith. And so the titular suspicion is that somebody is leaking the information to the Wraith. Obviously, the people on the base, Weir, Shepard, and Bates, who was in Rising but is now introduced as essentially the base security officer, are suspicious of the Athosians because, well, nobody in the Atlantis expedition would A, know how to contact the Wraith, and B, have any incentive to deal with the Wraith, right? Because they've only been there a couple of days.
Right. It is challenging to the audience because you're like, you want to be like, of course it's not the Athosians. They're good people. We trust Taylor as a viewer. We how could we not? And, the easier thing, and they give you that in Bates, giving someone to hate for even suggesting it. But then they give you Weir, who you like as a viewer generally, and she's considering it because she must. And you're like, that's true. I mean, no one in the expedition from Earth would have any method. It's pretty much an impossibility, really.
Yeah.
And so it must be one of the Athosians, right? It must. And so then you have to grapple with that.
Yeah, and that's the entire focus is figuring out, well, who's doing this? How's it happening? Yada yada yada, right? And the wedge that has been slowly driven over the past couple of episodes between the expedition and the Athosians finally reaches a head, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to end at the end with the Athosians living on the Atlantis mainland. Because that's another thing that the B plot is we find out stuff about. I believe the planet ends up being called Atlantia or something like that, which is very, very close to what Ford wants to call it, which is
Atlantica.
There we go. Yeah. Which is another instance of our favorite recurring bit of "You don't get to name anything" by John Shepard.
Yeah. Once again, that's pretty much what he says. Mm-hmm. Ever. You don't get to name anything ever. Yeah.
Or it's called Lantia. I can't remember. I know that the ancients eventually start being called Lantians in the series.
Yeah.
Just because they're the people of Atlantis. We're not going to go into that for now. So that's really the B plot is just, oh, hey, we can explore more of the land. But it is really a B plot. It's maybe even a C plot. And 90% of the effort is focused on the idea of how do we prevent the Athosians from telling the Wraith where we're going, right?
Right.
And it unfortunately kind of proceeds how you would expect it. You get, Weir and Bates interrogating Athosians. And we see the Athosians that we've come to know and love, right? We see Halling get interviewed, and Halling gets really aggravated, right? And Holling's like, I was expecting an interview to talk to you, to get to know you, Dr. Weir, and you are accusing me of these things.
Yeah, I was expecting an interview, not an interrogation.
Exactly.
And he's clearly upset, but he's got that Athosian poise, He doesn't raise his voice. He just says that and then walks out. Yeah, it's good stuff. He raises his voice a little bit when he talks about his son, but, it's...
Yeah, most of the suspicion, right, that's coming is coming from Bates, not Dr. Weir, right? Dr. Weir is trying to get everybody to be copacetic, and Bates is trying to, bait him into coming across the table at him, right?
Yeah.
Bates is really positioned... Bates has legitimate reason to be doing what he's doing. Bates... And this will continue through the series. Bates is basically Colonel Sumner 2.0, except he's not higher ranked than Shepard, right?
Yeah.
That's basically his function for the first while.
Regularly insubordinate, though, it seems like.
Yeah. So after we get the Halling interrogation, I'm going to call it an interrogation because that's what it was, we find Zelenka and McKay, who McKay has a little bit of a role to play in this, but not... I wouldn't consider him a major player in this, besides the fact that he does some analysis that solves the issue, right?
Right.
He is a more background character in this episode than in most.
Yes. I will say, though, it's interesting, I don't know. I think they do make you do a little bit of work as the viewer when they make McKay so very vehemently come to the defense of the Athosian. He doesn't yet, at least, seem like the type, right? He's supposed to be, He's somewhat detached, and it makes sense that he's angrily saying things at people who outrank him. That, of course, tracks.
Yeah,
but
that's just McKay.
Yes, but angrily coming to the defense of the Athosians, a very heart-forward move for a very brain-focused guy, you know?
Yeah.
Didn't quite track for me. Like, it wasn't a glaring issue, but I was like, what great... Because, you know, we haven't seen him interact very closely with Taylor. What is the driver behind this?
Yeah, I think again, it's just an attempt to develop McKay's character to be more complex.
It does. I think it is them trying to be like, look, he has a heart. He's getting there. But it seemed a little maybe premature for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Yeah. But the first time we see him in the episode, or the first time he's really in the center of the episode, because he's obviously there when. The first time we see him get a Wraith Stunner to the face during the intro.
You really smacked him right in the mouth.
Yeah. But later on we see him with Zelenka, right? This is the second time we've seen Zelenka. And again, in further episodes, further seasons, Zelenka becomes the essentially McKay's right-hand science guy, even though McKay would not describe him that way. Right. McKay is standoffish to everybody. But Zelenka really starts to kind of creep in as this important side character, almost like Sergeant Seiler, for example, in SG-1.
The engineer?
Yeah.
And the base?
Except unlike Sergeant Seiler, Zelenka doesn't get shot across the rooms as often. like Seiler's got to have it's a good thing he's in the military, because otherwise his medical bills would be through the roof.
Oh yeah. He gets thrown against the gate. He gets electrocuted.
He gets, he's the guy pouring liquid nitrogen on the gate when it's heating up. He's in a shitty position, and it's usually because Carter has told them that they need to do something, right?
Yeah.
He's the IT guy, right? Who actually has to install the crap.
Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, so Zelenka and McKay are in the back of a jumper, and McKay's like, "Oh, I don't recognize this thing," and he's like, "So I'm gonna go cross-reference it in the database down in the control room."
Yeah.
And Zelenka takes 2 steps up to the tablet that McKay was working on, presses it, obviously activating the command. Well, and McKay goes, "What did you do?" And he's like, "I didn't do anything."
I think I don't know. It's ambiguous, because it really reads like he goes up and he pushes his glasses up. He grabs the tablet with 2 hands and brings it closer to look at it, and then it activates it. I don't know if he
he definitely hits the tablet. I don't want to say that it's 100% intentional.
Yeah, it's ambiguous whether or not he did that on purpose. Yeah.
And then the roof opens for the jumper bay,
right,
which reveals to us that, hey, we can take out the jumpers and they don't just go to the gate room. We can also explore the planet.
Right.
And when we're exploring the planet, we find out that there's this giant stretch of mainland.
Huge landmass. They say something million.
15 million square miles.
15 million square miles.
And I love McKay's reaction to that.
Yes, please.
So he says it's 15 million square miles. And McKay goes, "That's about the size of," takes a few seconds, can't think of anything, and goes, "Well, it's really big."
Yeah, it's like, that's about the size of, I don't know, but it's huge.
Huge. Yeah. And we're never really given a proper scale for Atlantis, for the size of the planet.
Right.
But yeah, it's giant. It's more than enough. And what's interesting is that basically Weir and the Athosians both agree that the Athosians should go to the mainland independently of each other, and then run into each other to inform each other that they are going to the mainland.
Yeah. So Weir is on her way to make the tough call, and there's that whole, there's a little meeting about it, and
and Holling's just like, "We're not welcome here, so we're going to the mainland."
Yeah, well, much more gently than that, as the Athosians do, but yes.
Well, yes,
and it's funny. I wrote that down too, because Weir is like we're walking with purpose, but okay, I have to break the news. And after Shepard was like, "Are you kidding me? You're gonna really make them leave?" And she's like, I've got to." And she's going to do that, and then Holling intercepts her on her way to him and just says, "We have heard you've discovered a mainland." He said, smiling, and he said, "We would like to go." So she doesn't even get to broach the subject, and then she's taken aback. She's like, "You would?" And he understands probably that was what the decision will be. And, he says, "Well, we cannot go through the gate, and we
we're not
cannot
welcome
stay.
here.
Yeah, we're not welcome here." And she's like, "That's not true." And he's like, we're gonna go."
Yeah, well,
yeah.
and they discuss the implications, right? Which is that because Weir brings up the fact, what happens if we go through the gate and we stop encountering the Wraith? Then we're going to know that it's you guys. And Holling's like, but what if you go through and you keep encountering the Wraith?
Well, actually, he says, he doesn't say what if. He says, and when you continue encountering the Wraith. Because there is no doubt in his mind that it's not one of them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
The Athosians leave, right?
They do.
And then we see a scientific mission with Colonel Shepard's team.
Yeah, and anthropological interest.
Yeah.
Some ruins near the gate. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course Taylor has stayed behind with the SG teams.
Oh yeah, which is a big sort of emotional component. Is that Holling,
she's a leader among her people,
but she elects to stay. It's all implied. We don't ever get. She never tells anyone or us, the audience, why. She tries to, and Holling stops her. Or tries to say, I don't want people to think. But we understand. She wants to be a part of this fight for her people. To fight the Wraith. She thinks that the Earthlings are the way to do it.
Yeah, are the best option for the Pegasus
the best
Galaxy.
ally. Yeah.
In much the same way as Teal'c, right? To bring up that comparison again.
Yes, good point.
It's the same ethos.
Yes.
Anyway, so they're on the planet, and Taylor explains that the native people are very shy, which, I mean, you can imagine in anytime the gate activates, well, the Wraith might be on their way, so hell yeah, you're going to hide, right? Mm-hmm. So, her and Ford she wants to go out and find the natives alone, and Shepard's like, no, you're going to take Ford with you, right? Which kind of to the audience signals hey, you're going to take Ford because I don't trust you, right? I don't think that that's necessarily the character's motivation in that moment. I think the character's motivation is more of, we're on an alien planet, we have been attacked by the Wraith. If something goes wrong, you being by yourself is a bad idea, right? Because up to this point, nobody has suspected Taylor. Everybody trusts Taylor, right?
Yeah.
But to the audience...
Well, except for Bates.
Well, yeah, but Bates is Bates.
Yeah, of course. But everyone else, it doesn't even... It's like, maybe the Athosians, not Taylor. No way, yeah.
Yeah, no, not Taylor. We trust Taylor. Taylor's on our team, right? And I think it signals to the audience the idea that Shepard might be entertaining Bates's idea, because a couple of scenes prior to that, Bates directly told, right, Shepard that he thinks it might be even Taylor, right? And Shepard just like shoots that down. So like to the audience, it reads as Shepard being suspicious of Taylor, but I don't think that's necessarily his character motivation.
Yeah, I think he's just like, and also he nor we have seen Taylor fight yet.
Yeah.
Which happens at the end of this episode, and it's incredible. But we had no idea, and nor did he. So he's like, take Ford with you. Take one of my guys with you. Watch your back.
And I love the little line that he gives when she's like, no, I should go alone. And he says, yeah, you will be alone with Lieutenant Ford.
Yeah. Such a smart
guy. That very like, you're doing this whether or not,
Yeah.
And so, while they're off, well, what should happen? But they get attacked by the Wraith, which not only does that happen, but also we see that Ford and Taylor are separated when that happens. Right? Which gives us, the audience, a very big hint that, Taylor must be the traitor, right? Which is, a dun 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 moment.
Yeah, and it's it is like they spend the whole episode communicating, well, it's not Taylor. And then right here in the third act, they're like...
And it plays as an excellent twist.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you buy it, I think.
Oh, yeah, no, you totally... The first time you're watching, you totally buy into it. On rewatch, you're like... On rewatch, you realize, oh, yeah, this is what they're doing.
Right.
Because what happens is they retreat through the gate, and then later on, Ford and Taylor retreat through the gate, except there's this tension that is built up in the scene because Weir doesn't know whether or not to let Taylor in because Ford is out of commission. Ford can't get on the radio to confirm Tayla's story.
It's everything
right?
is the worst case scenario for
Exactly.
easing any suspicion. Yeah.
And the fact that Weir lets them in, right? That kind of shows you to Weir's character, right?
Right.
And lets her in, but still has like twice the normal armed guards around the gate.
Right.
Right.
Who absolutely start flagging her with their weapons.
Yeah. They are fully expecting to, Tayla is now a threat, right?
Right.
And you understand why they're doing that, but anyway. So then what happens is what I find great from a kind of narrative standpoint is they have Bates go up to McKay with all of Tayla's stuff and basically just dump her purse out, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more just like a bag, like you would expect somebody who is nomadic to have.
Right. Yeah.
But just dumps all of her stuff on his desk and is like, you find out how she's communicating with the Wraith. Right. And the thing is that I think McKay doesn't want to piss off Bates because Bates is kind of scary. Bates reads as the kind of guy who would shoot you for not doing what he says.
Oh yeah, he does look like that guy for sure.
Yeah. So and like you said, McKay's reluctant to do it, but McKay does do it.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's key is when he finds out that Tayla has a transmitter, the first thing he does is call Shepard in, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't bring it up. I think he also calls Weir in, but he's not like broadcasting it to the entire base, right? He's like, we need to handle this, sensitively, right? And I think the kind of, there's this turn of, Tayla's transmitting to the Wraith, right? When he explains that Tayla has this transmitter. And then there's a line from Shepard that pays off something, a half a scene from Rising, where Shepard picks up the necklace and gives it to Tayla.
Yeah.
Where Shepard goes, no, it's not Tayla. I gave her that necklace.
Yeah, he sort of like groans and says, I gave it to her. Yeah.
Yeah. And that then absolves Tayla, which it's a good payoff for the audience.
Yeah, it's a very elegant. It's something 3 episodes prior was done, and it pays off now. That's pretty. In an age of television where we didn't have these sweeping arcs yet, like Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, what have you. That's I always appreciate. You see it a little bit in The Next Generation, where at least they acknowledge things in previous episodes that earlier super episodic series wouldn't do.
I mean, it was starting in this era is when you started to get that, right?
Yeah.
With things like Stargate, but most people would point I'm not saying all, but most people would point to more Buffy, because Buffy was a very popular series.
Oh yeah.
Right,
True.
which would have the season-long villain arc.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
True. That's true.
So yeah, it's it's bringing back information. So if you remember that, hey, you're rewarded, right?
Yeah.
But it also allows them to get away with a blameless end, right? It allows them to build up all this tension, then twist the knife, and then relieve all of the tension, right?
Yeah.
And then, okay, so now we know that we've been transmitting to the Wraith. This is a device meant to find ancients, which is why it which is why it was activated. And that, they go through the rigmarole of how this works, and
And they finally get closure that, yep, it was their fault that the Athosians were attacked by the Wraith, because Shepard activated that transmitter when he touched it. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also, not just that happened, but there's also the closure of nobody's really at fault.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about the Athosians. We don't have to worry about Tayla. We don't have to worry about anybody.
Yeah.
This is something that was a great misunderstanding.
Yeah,
right?
it's airtight. Like, he picked it up. It was buried in the dirt. He gave it to Tayla. Like, there's no way.
Mm.
Yeah, that any of that was anything other than what it was, which was an accident.
And then we shift gears for the end, where they decide, hey, if we know planets where this will attract the Wraith, why don't we capture one of them?
Yeah.
Right?
There's so much in this episode. Holy shit.
Yeah. And at the end of the episode, that's what they do. They basically surround 3 Wraith drones, the 3 Wraith warriors in one of the drones, right? The warriors are the ones with the masks.
Right.
And they take out all the warriors. We find out about that they have self-destruct devices.
Yeah.
right, on them. And
A
then
la
we see
Predator.
Taylor see the one drone sneaking off
Yeah, there was
in a very
something.
cartoony way.
I don't know why they did this, because his performance once he's captured is great, but the way it was shot or the way it was cut together, and it was just brief enough to be. The concept is NARM, and I think that's from the show 6 Feet Under. When something is presented as serious or even dark, but you interact with it and it's humorous. It's a big humorous.
I think part of the issue is, especially in heavy makeup, and how much face makeup, because they're shooting in natural light, right?
Yeah.
When you're in an artificial lighting setting, the Wraith look a lot better, and I think that's mainly because you can control the way, and that's with all practical effects, right?
Right.
You have to light the things very carefully, otherwise they look fake, right? And I think that's part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, so
yeah, and it's the physicality of he's like hunched over and slinking around, and it's really awkward, but just for those moments. And then all of a sudden, Taylor gets herself a bow staff and starts whipping his ass with it. And then at some point, it's interesting, off screen, he must have broken it. We don't see that happen, I don't think, because then she's
if we do, it's like it's a one shot kind of thing.
Yeah, and then she ends up using them as
punji sticks, basically.
Yes,
not punji. Not is it punji? No,
punji is the one with the handle that comes at the side, I think.
No, that's tonfa. Punji is a type of pit.
Oh yeah,
it's a type
pit
of trap
with all the spears at the bottom.
It's Anyway,
dual
stick fighting.
Yeah, and she's it's sick, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
What? Yeah, she's great.
And at the end, Shepard managed to stun that Wraith before it is capable of, because the Wraith, despite Taylor's excellent fighting abilities, the Wraith manages to get the upper hand.
Oh, for sure.
But then Shepard manages to hit it with one of the stunners and stun it and prevent the Wraith from using the self-destruct mechanism. And now they have a captured Wraith, which will come in handy in the next couple of episodes.
Yeah, and they show him. There's a little bit of initial interrogation of Jesus, Shepard being like wandering around the cell. They establish that they found some sort of shielded cage in Atlantis where the Wraith is being kept. The Wraith is like, "Oh, my people are going to rescue me. You've made a mistake." Shepard is smarmy in a very fun way.
And he's like, "Yeah, we found your transmitter, right?" It's a good interrogation scene. And yes, there will be more than one coming up in future episodes. I will say this
just ends.
Yeah,
like,
it ends
which
very
makes
abruptly.
Sense because there was so much in it that they were like, okay, it's over now.
Yeah, it's like you got to end it now, right? And it does leave you on a cliffhanger, and it does want you're like, oh, I want to watch the next episode, right?
Yes, of course.
So yeah, that. Unless you have any other things on episode 5, I think that does it for episodes 3, 4, and 5.
I have one more thing.
Please.
There is a moment where McKay is being asked several questions, and he answers them, and then he's asked one more that he doesn't have the answer to, and he says, "What am I, Answer Man?"
Oh yeah.
And it was. I'm not doing it justice because it's very quick. And he says something afterwards too. He doesn't let it linger. He's like, "What am I, Answer Man? I don't know." Like, and then it was just such a dumb quip. It was like McKay trying to be Shepard. Like, what the hell is Answer Man? Like,
here's the thing. That kind of flippant answering of like, I don't have all the answers. Besides the fact that McKay always seems to imply that he has all the answers.
Right. Yeah.
This actually comes up later. There's he's fooling with some system and it's like counting down to self-destruct or whatever, right?
Yes.
And he's like, yeah, we don't know how long this could take. A minute, it could take, it could take 3 years, and Shepard's like, well, give me a number. And he's like, okay, 7. Right? There's almost a level at which McKay is just done with everybody's shit.
Yeah,
right?
It is funny the way because we were watching this, and it's by no means a comedy, but I almost made you pause it because of how loudly I guffawed when he said, "What am I, Answer Man?" I don't know. It's so dumb and so quick and so good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's another strength where I think SG-1 is a lot a lot drier in its comedy.
True, yeah. It's like Teal'c didn't understand something. Piccolo's playing the doo-doo-doo, and then it's just like
oh hey, Jack O'Neill just said something quippy, right?
Right, yeah.
As where this is, they kind of throw jokes back and forth at one another, and I think I mentioned this in the last podcast episode, which is Atlantis is a lot more of an ensemble cast.
Right. Yeah.
Than SG1, despite the fact that SG1 definitely has a cast of common characters, right? We get to know a lot more. I would argue that by season 5, we have at least 8, if not 10 characters that, while everyone is not in every episode, we have about 10 characters who we all care about and we all know, and we know their personalities and how they interact with one another, right?
And we have an intimate understanding of who they are.
Yeah. And they show up a lot, right? As we're in SG1, you essentially have the main 4, and then you've got General Hammond, and every once in a while you get some dickhead like Mayborn, right?
Yeah.
So, I think showing the way that they talk to each other being more casual is important for the series, and I think it's a good feature of the series.
Yes. Yeah. I agree.
I think that'll do it for this episode.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us. If you nerd. If you like the episode, please, on whatever service we're on, if we're on a service, please rate us 5 stars, comment that you loved it, right?
Yeah.
Help us out that way. And next time we'll be doing 2 episodes. We'll be doing episode 6 and 7. Yeah, so next time we will look at episodes 6 and 7. That is Childhood's End and Poisoning the Well, and those are going to give us a nice view of different ways that people deal with the impending threat of the Wraith in the Pegasus Galaxy. All right, well that's it. We will see you all on the next episode of the Iratus Complication.